Forget data protection. This isn't about keeping your data safe. This is daylight robbery dressed up as law. Since GDPR began, Europe has drained 4.7 billion euros from US companies. That's a staggering 83% of all fines ever issued. And if the penalties were fair, America would have paid just $500 million, not nearly 5. Meanwhile, European companies, the very ones writing the rules, barely touch the penalty box. This isn't regulation. This isn't fairness. It's a cash raid on America's tech giants, and the target is your economy. Let's start with the hard facts. Since the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, went into effect in 2018, regulators across Europe have levied more than 5.65 billion euros in total fines. On paper, GDPR was supposed to be the world's toughest privacy law, protecting citizens from big tech's misuse of personal data. But look closer at where the money is coming from. Out of that 5.65 billion euros, US companies alone paid 4.68 billion euros. That's more than 83% of every euro collected. Meanwhile, European companies, the ones operating under the very same law, were fined just 529 million euros. That's barely 9%. Do the math and the imbalance is breathtaking. If fines were proportional, US firms would have paid around 570 million euros. Instead, they were hammered for almost 9 times that amount. That gap, over 4 billion euros, isn't just a number. It's a transfer of wealth across the Atlantic, from Silicon Valley to Brussels, a transfer that Europe counts on and America barely talks about.
The names are familiar. Meta alone, Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, has paid more than $2.5 billion in penalties. Amazon was slammed with a record-breaking fine of 746 million euros by Luxembourg in 2021. Google has been fined repeatedly, 50 million in France, hundreds of millions more across other member states. And most recently, Brussels slapped Apple with a 500 million euro fine for violating the new Digital Markets Act, Europe's latest regulatory weapon. Compare that to European tech firms. Few even register on the radar. They're shielded, protected, even ignored. It's almost as if Europe wrote the rules not to police itself, but to police America. Brussels claims this is about leveling the playing field. Regulators insist US companies are simply bigger violators, collecting more data, running larger networks, handling billions of users worldwide. That's true in part, but here's the contradiction. European giants like SAP, Deutsche Telekom, and others also manage vast amounts of personal data. Yet their fines? A fraction of what their American rivals pay. So ask yourself, is this about fairness or about funneling billions into EU coffers? At first glance, you might think, so what? Big tech can afford it. But here's the hidden layer. Companies don't absorb billions in penalties out of goodwill. They pass the costs on, to users, to advertisers, to employees. That means higher service prices, fewer jobs, lower wages. It means more cost-cutting in America and more money flowing overseas. Every euro drained through GDPR becomes a hidden tax on American consumers and workers. You may not see it on your receipt, but it's there. In your subscription fees, in your ad costs, in your shrinking job opportunities. The raid doesn't stop in Silicon Valley. It reaches into your wallet.
There's another dimension here: politics. Europe doesn't just see GDPR as privacy law, it sees it as leverage, a way to weaken US tech dominance while giving European firms breathing room. Think about it. Silicon Valley runs the platforms billions rely on. Facebook, Google, Amazon, Apple, they dominate globally. Europe doesn't have equivalents at the same scale. So what's the solution? Regulate the foreign giants until they bleed. And bleed they have. 4.68 billion euros isn't the ceiling, it's just the beginning. The European Commission has made clear, enforcement will only get tougher. That means bigger fines, faster investigations, harsher restrictions, and always America in the crosshairs. And here's where the story turns darker. GDPR isn't Europe's only weapon. The new Digital Markets Act, the DMA, has just come into force. Its target? The so-called gatekeepers, companies like Apple, Google, Meta, Amazon, Microsoft. And guess what? Every single one is American. Not one European company made the list. Already, the Commission is swinging the hammer. Apple, 500 million euros for alleged anti-competitive app store practices. Meta, 200 million euros for advertising violations. And regulators warn, these are just the opening shots. The fines will escalate, the raids will continue. So here's the question the headlines don't ask. If Europe keeps draining billions from US firms, what happens when the costs finally hit a breaking point? Will companies pull services from Europe altogether? Will they slash jobs in the US to make up the difference? Or will they quietly push the costs onto you until your monthly subscriptions, your digital ads, your online services cost more than ever before? This isn't just a corporate story, it's a story about your economy, your paycheck, and your future in a global digital war. And it's a war America is losing.
The raid is only accelerating, and the timing could not be worse, because 2025 brings not only a new European Commission, but also a new US presidency under Donald Trump. That means the future of transatlantic trade and the fate of this data war hangs in the balance. Let's be clear. Europe has struggled for decades to produce its own global tech giants. While Silicon Valley scaled Apple, Google, Meta, Amazon, and Microsoft into trillion-dollar companies, Europe fell behind. Instead of building rivals, Brussels built rules. GDPR, the Digital Services Act, the Digital Markets Act, all aimed squarely at American firms. Why? Because those fines aren't just about compliance, they're about revenue. Think of it like this. Every billion-dollar fine is a budget line for the European Union. It funds projects, it fuels politics, it justifies bureaucracy. And the best part? For them, the money doesn't come from European voters. It comes from American shareholders. Now ask yourself, where is Washington? Why hasn't the US government pushed back against what looks more like targeted revenue extraction than fair regulation? The answer is unsettling. America is divided. On one side, lawmakers want big tech reined in, at home and abroad. On the other, there's fear of sparking a trade war with Europe at a time when the US needs allies against China and Russia. So, Brussels squeezes harder and Washington stays quiet. But with Trump back in the White House, that silence may not last long.
Here's where things get even more complicated, because this isn't just about tech, it's about energy. Europe is hooked on US liquefied natural gas, LNG, especially after cutting off Russian supply. Billions flow westward as tankers keep European lights on. But what happens when Trump demands better terms? What happens when he links gas flows to GDPR raids? Will Brussels back down or double down? Scenarios, where this leads. Scenario 1, US companies cave. They keep paying fines, keep passing costs onto Americans, and Europe keeps raking in billions. Ordinary people pay the price through higher prices and fewer jobs, while Europe strengthens its budget. That's the path we're on today. Scenario 2, retaliation. Washington finally calls Brussels out, tying data fines to trade deals, LNG shipments, or NATO funding. The result? A full-blown transatlantic trade war, tariffs on European cars, sanctions on EU firms, fines on European banks. In other words, escalation. Scenario 3, withdrawal. Imagine US firms saying enough. Apple pulls services, Amazon limits operations, Meta scales back platforms. Europe loses access, consumers revolt, and Brussels is forced to rethink. But would companies really walk away from a market of 450 million people? That's the billion-euro question. And through it all, here's what matters most. This is not just a Silicon Valley problem, it's an American problem. Every fine, every raid, every penalty is money that could have gone to innovation, wages, lower prices. Instead, it's siphoned across the Atlantic. When Europe bleeds big tech, the wound spreads to your paycheck, your subscriptions, your economy. You pay, even if you never hear about it.
Here's the irony. GDPR was meant to give people more control over their data. Yet in practice, most people click accept without reading anything. The fines don't make you safer, they just make Europe richer. Privacy hasn't meaningfully improved, but budgets have. And here's the contradiction. European regulators boast of protecting citizens, while ordinary Americans foot the bill. It's a transfer of wealth disguised as consumer protection, and most people never see it. So what happens next? The EU will keep pushing harder. New fines, bigger cases, more headlines. And America, divided at home, pressured abroad, must decide whether to fight back or keep paying. The stakes are nothing less than digital sovereignty, economic fairness, and the balance of power across the Atlantic. Trump has hinted at tying trade to regulation. Brussels has hinted at escalating enforcement. The collision course is set, and when it hits, it won't just be big tech that feels it. It will be your wallet, your job, your future. So the next time you hear GDPR fine, don't think it's just Silicon Valley paying the price. Think of the billions siphoned out of America. Think of the imbalance, 83% of penalties hitting US firms while Europe shields its own. And think of the silence in Washington as billions bleed away unchecked. This isn't regulation, this isn't fairness. It's a cash raid, a raid on America's companies, America's economy, America's future. And unless someone stops it, the next headline won't be about tech, it will be about you.